Good evening, everyone. So we are in the almost the fag end of the neck module of the head and neck webinar series. So to speak on today's topic, we have an eminent professor, Professor Prathimesh Pai from Tata Memorial Hospital, who we all look up as an encouragement and encouragement during our training days and even now. And he is always welcome to give us suggestions and help us whenever we are in trouble. So today, sir is going to talk about management of carotid artery in neck dissections. And he was kind enough to take time from his busy schedule and participate in this webinar. So Bhargav, if you can run our...
Yes, sir.
So before I introduce Vijay, we just want to invite everyone for our minimally invasive head and neck surgery, that is the continued online medical education series. The module 1 is on transoral laser microsurgery. So we are co-hosting this event with Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, University of Sydney, Australia. And we have eminent faculty from Australia, Professor Carsten Palm, Professor Farooq Rifat, and Professor Daniel from Sydney. And we have the pioneer, Professor Giorgio Peretti from Italy, Professor Piazza, and Dr. Francesco from Italy. So we also have eminent faculties from India. We have Pai sir, Chaukar sir, we have Deepak Parikh sir, Rakesh Srivatsava sir, Alok Thakkar sir also participating in this meeting. So our last talk on the neck module is about management of complication in neck dissection. That is on the Saturday, 27th, between 4 to 5 p.m. So to moderate today's session, we have Dr. Vijay. Vijay is a good friend who has done his general surgery from Bangalore Medical College, and later he has done his MCH from Tata Memorial Hospital. So in certain difficult cases of extensive thoracic involvement, he has a passion for thoracic surgery along with head and neck. So we have done some at least 3 combined cases and with excellent outcomes. So thank you, Vijay, for taking time out and agreeing to participate in this webinar. Over to Vijay to moderate the session and take it forward.
Thanks, Akshay. It's a great initiative by you guys, Akshay, Shalini, and team, for having such academic sessions. It's a packet of knowledge. It is. Secondly, I thank you for giving me an opportunity to moderate a session where my role model, Dr. Prathimesh Pai, the professor of head neck oncology, is speaking. Pai sir is a well-renowned head neck oncologist. He doesn't require too much of introduction. Everyone in head neck oncology know about Pai sir. And one more thing about Pai sir is he makes most of the complex surgeries in head neck. I worked with him throughout my head neck postings in Tata. What I really learned from him is that most complex surgeries, be it ITF clearances, be it maxillectomy, be it difficult thyroids, he makes it look he simplifies it mainly based on applied surgical anatomical principles. That's what is the key, and he makes it easily reproducible by others. So I almost remember Pai sir for majority of my difficult cases. It's always, Pai sir is always on back of my mind, that whatever principles he taught. So without much ado, I would like to hand over to the Pai sir to talk on the management of carotid. It's one of the interesting topics to hear from him about how we manage carotid during a difficult neck dissection. I would like to request Pai sir to take over.
Thank you, Vijay and Akshay, for this kind introduction. When Akshay told me to speak on the carotid artery and head and neck, I was wondering whether I am being put into a spot. But I think, going by thinking about it, I realized that it is always a problem area for all of us surgeons. And I just have put across some of my thoughts and some literature to sort of take us through what I would like to discuss about the carotid. I call it the surgeon's nemesis because this is something that we all get worried about at times, looking at the outcomes in literature, going by other surgeons, going by our colleagues, and who tell us not to head into this kind of a surgery. Now, when you look at carotid artery involvement, we always get worried because we know that this is a poor oncologic outcome. You can have encasements of the carotid and you may not be able to resect it. And most of the literature mentions it as the first surgical contraindication. We have very inadequate radiological assessment, and we actually are hunting in the dark because we cannot actually plan it without good radiological support. And we know that most of these patients with advanced tumors will have a high incidence of distant metastasis despite good loco-regional control. And that's the reason why we do not want to head into doing a carotid artery resection. Now, in spite of doing good imaging, we know that we can have a surgical surprise. 5 to 10% of your cervical lymph nodes might be involving the carotid, which may have been undiagnosed on imaging. So at that point, you're put in a spot during surgery, and you need to have your drill ready as to how you will manage it if you have a situation that you encounter. Now, we also know that we do these shave resections, and we know that there is an incidence of stroke post-operatively. You might have carotid rupture on you post-op. And we know all this carries up to a 30% risk of a cerebrovascular event. Now, all this put together, we also have a squamous cancer in the patient, which has a very bad biological outcome. And hence, it is very important that we evaluate the neck mass carefully. Now, we know that the tumor abuts a carotid sheath and it appears fixed, but clearly we have to understand, when you look at the anatomy, we understand that the carotid sheath, the pretracheal fascia and the deep cervical fascia, which encompasses the prevertebral fascia, is what actually defines whether you can remove this tumor safely or not. Look at all the facial compartments. You can see that the carotid is most medially placed. So for the which are usually around the internal jugular vein to come into contact with the carotid and encase it and fix it is very difficult. So it takes a long while before it can happen. So not all tumors which appear to be involving the carotid are unresectable. So what exactly fixes it is this tumor, which then goes on to go all around it to fix to the prevertebral fascia. So if you have a lymph node or a mass which is coming onto the carotid sheath, it would necessarily have to involve the prevertebral and the retropharyngeal fascia to actually trap the carotid. And thereafter, it goes on to invade the intima. Now, how do you clinically judge involvement? A mass like this, which you might encounter in your routine practice, you might call this stuck to the table. But we need to assess, is this actually involved? Remember the previous diagram, and remember that for this mass to go on to the prevertebral, you would have to give it some time. Clinical assessment is important. Extension of the neck, the prevertebral facial involvement, the mobility side to side and vertical. Remember that if the mass appears fixed in the vertical direction, that may be the indication that it is truly involved, because it now goes along the length of the carotid as well. But all this clinical impression gives you a fair degree of idea. The accuracy is between 32 and 63%. So when we know that the surgeons are good at clinical assessment, your assessment is between 30 to 60%. Hence, imaging is very important for us to corroborate with your clinical findings. Now, when you look at imaging of the carotid, there are 4 things in literature that will tell you about the involvement of the carotid. The most common what we follow is encasement. So encasement of the artery is of 3 types: less than 180 degrees, between 180 to 270 degrees, and more than 270 degrees. So going back to this picture, you can imagine that it has to be all around. So it has to cross the prevertebral to come to the retropharyngeal fascia to be more than 270 degrees. Obliteration of the fat plane, deformation of the carotid artery, and the length of contact. So combination of clinical and radiological evaluation is of crucial importance to assess the resectability of the carotid. Imaging of the carotid. Get 2 imagings available. What we end up with is a CT scan in most of our cases. But what we need to realize is that the sensitivity and specificity of the MRI, when the tumor now spreads more than 180 degrees, is better with the MRI. So when you have an encasement of the artery, you need to look at the fat planes, the deformation of the artery, as well as the length of contact. So do not base your judgment only on the degree of involvement. So when you look at MRI, if it is 270 degrees circumferential involvement, it predicts unresectable disease. Because as I said, it will have to go across and then involve deep investing fascia. Loss of facial plane. Now, this is something we need to evaluate very carefully. You need to see that there is a fat plane around the carotid, and this fat plane loss can be variable. But you need to evaluate it all around, along with the amount of the degree of involvement. So along with the, though it has a high false positive rate, if you combine it with the degree as well as the deformity, you will get a better sensitivity of your imaging. Now, often you want to rule out whether it is resectable or not. Now, technically, carotid involvement is unresectable. As I want to bring this point up very clearly, that we are not here to say that carotids should be resected. However, we need to place careful consideration before you declare it inoperable. So you need to stage your patient carefully. You need to see the general condition. You need to see the patient's social condition. Because you understand that once you head this path, there's a lot of investigations that you need. You need the pre-treatment investigations. You need perioperative care and post-operative investigations. So you need to understand that the patient should have good social support, good financial support before you head this path. You need to do a careful assessment of the carotid as well as the intracerebral circulation. Now, many times we talk of squamous cell cancer in context to all head and neck, but there are many other histologies. And remember, these histologies are favorable, and you should consider resecting these tumors if and as well as the carotid, because the outcomes of these tumors are biologically radically different from a squamous cell cancer. Needless to say, general condition that your ability to resect the primary and the availability of adjuvant therapy make a big difference towards your treatment planning. Now, there has been a meta-analysis in 1992, and this was done by Carl Schneiderman and Frank D'Amico. Now, they analyzed the data from 1987 to 1992. And they included 158 carotid artery resections in this. In this data, 65% of cases were reconstructed, either with an autologous vein graft, 7% had alloplastic material, and 11% had external carotid to internal carotid anastomosis. 35% of them had just an IC ligation. Some were grafted with veins, but then finally they all thrombosed. Now, when they looked at the neurological morbidity, 26% of them had some amount of neurological morbidity. The major cerebrovascular accident with permanent or major neurological deficits were seen in around 16.7%. Minor and transient deficits were seen in 10%. And the neurological morbidity was similar between those that were ligated and those that were reconstructed. So remember, this is a very old paper, and this is again retrospective. So though it is a meta-analysis, they are analyzing a large number of patients resected some years ago. They had a follow-up period of 2 years, and they saw that they had a recurrence in almost 75% of their patients. So what is interesting is there was local with either regional or distant in 32%. There was regional and distant disease in 47%, and only distant disease in 21%. And what they realized was that the disease-free survival at 2 years was about 22%. That means 1 in 5 patients would have benefited from that carotid artery resection. They also felt that there was significant palliation in this subset of patients because then carotid hemorrhage and impending carotid blowout secondary to tumor involvement was avoided. They also compared this group of patients to an advanced end-stage disease. That's an N3 disease with extracapsular spread. And what they realized was that majority of these patients did not develop distant metastasis, which is contradicting our thought that most of these advanced tumors will develop distant metastasis. And what is important to realize is that distant metastasis frequently is associated with local or regional recurrence, which brings us to the moot point that if we achieve a very good local and regional clearance of disease, the chances of distant metastasis reduces. So all in all, it depends on our technical ability to resect this tumor. And I frequently tell this that our patients having local failure is not only the sign of our aggressive biology, it is also of an indication of our technical failure. In this meta-analysis, 2/3 of these recurrences were loco-regional, and major neurological morbidity occurred in only 17%. So with this, what they felt was you need to actually categorize your patient based on the cerebral blood flow studies, and you should consider surgery in very select population. When they analyzed the group between N3 patients with ECS, they found there was no survival difference. That means in the highest risk category of patients, when you compare with those, a carotid artery resection scores similar. So if you are going to resect a stage 4 patient who has an N3 disease, you should also consider this in your armamentarium. Now, when you look at the outcome and prognosis in a carotid artery resection, of course, with squamous cell cancer, there's a poor long-term survival. There is early local failure followed by regional and or a distant metastasis. What is important to note is that per primum patients undergoing carotid artery resection show significant long-term survivorship. However, this needs to be considered that this is a limited role of carotid artery resection in very select cases, and the patients need to be counseled about the neurological sequelae, which can occur in about 17%. Now, how do we avoid this cerebrovascular event? You need to do a proper assessment. And to do this, there are a few radiological investigations that we should do. The first of which is a 4-vessel angiography. This is used to establish that there is a patency of the vessels and that there is a good collateral flow available through the circle of Willis. Following this, we need to do a trial balloon occlusion. With this, we will be able to determine the presence of a collateral flow. In this, after you determine that there is a good flow across the circle of Willis, you occlude the carotid artery in which you're going to resect, and the vessel is occluded for up to 15 to 30 minutes. With this, we will assume that there is a good collateral flow enough to supply the cerebrum. The patient is monitored for development of any neurological signs and symptoms. Now, even if the patient tolerates this and does not develop any neurological signs, we know that you can have a cerebrovascular event subsequently after 24 hours in up to 15%. And this could be because of the thrombus development in the distal carotid stump, or the one during surgery you have encountered hypotension and decreased blood pressure, which can reduce the cerebral blood flow. What is required to be done over and above this is a SPECT scan. So what we do practice in our hospital is the patient, after undergoing a balloon test occlusion, undergoes a SPECT scan. So what does this tell you? It is actually a semi-quantitative comparison of blood flow based on the difference in the tracer retention between each of the cerebral hemispheres. So after the patient has tolerated the balloon occlusion, technetium-99 is injected intravenously with the balloon kept inflated for an additional 15 to 30 minutes. And then you study the cerebral blood flow patterns between the two hemispheres. If there is less than 10% difference, you know that there is an adequate blood flow. This also is not very sacrosanct, and you might still have a 5% of your patients developing cerebrovascular accidents. And what is the best so far is a xenon flow scanning, wherein the xenon 133 is inhaled by the patient, and then there you get a quantitative estimation of what exactly is the amount of blood flow. And this adequate blood flow is determined as more than 30 ml per 100 gram of tissue per minute. Now, this is not available even in our institute, and this is something that is sacrosanct with knowing exact amount of perfusion of your brain. This brings us to the question, should we actually evaluate the patency of circular villus? Now, many times we will encounter carotid blowouts in very advanced cancers, or maybe in routinely operated cases. Now, in those cases, we don't have time to have any opportunity to do this evaluations. So what should you do? You should go ahead and save life, and you need to ligate it, explaining everything to the patient's relatives. If possible, if you have a microvascular team with you, remember reconstruction is still favorable if it is early on. So if you have a bleed which is early on in your surgery post-op period, you should consider reconstruction. So do not just go ahead and ligate, maintain the patient's blood pressure, see to it that you have a microvascular team coming in and offer reconstruction. It may be impractical if you have a patient with an uncontrolled fistula over a few weeks with an infected bed. In those cases, you have to go ahead and do a carotid resection. Now, if you are seeing a minor sentinel bleed over time, it will be best to get your intervention radiologist in and do an angiography and consider stenting, because it will save you this blowout in future. And we need to understand that if you have a situation like uncontrolled fistula over time, or a tumor that has grown and has occluded the carotid, remember that this has been a slow process. And once you have occlusion of the vessel, there is circulation that develops, and most of the patients don't develop a neurological deficit. And that's why we will go ahead with the ligation if required. Now, this you need to keep in mind that if you have done a carotid artery ligation without reconstruction, the literature is fraught with high degree of permanent cerebrovascular events. But remember, if the carotids were occluded gradually over 8 days, the incidence is less than 5%. Less than 7 days, it goes to 30%, and abrupt ligation is almost 42%. So remember that if you have a patient who has got a slow growing tumor over time and then presenting to you with a carotid rupture, he is unlikely to develop a cerebral complication because there's already cross circulation developed. So then what are the general guidelines for carotid artery resection? Now, I can sit here and I'll tell you, you evaluate all your patients and do it. But these guidelines are when there is a good team and when there is a patient who is willing to take the risk. So these cases should be done along with a multidisciplinary approach. The decision should be tailored to the individual and to the clinical situation. And you need to have a tumor which is localized with a localized invasion, not that it is traversing the entire carotid. There should be no evidence of an unresectable skull base or vertebral invasion. So if you have a tumor that is very close to the skull base, you will not be able to reconstruct because there is no space for you to do the anastomosis. Of course, you will not have, of course, select a patient who has no evidence, who has distant metastasis. And of course, you should do a cerebrovascular flow study. What is the contraindication? As we discussed earlier, the patient's comorbidities, the ability to tolerate surgery, technical feasibility of removing this tumor, and overall functional status. So if the patient is poor in general condition and the outcomes are poor outcomes are expected, you should not head this path. The patient should be counseled and you need to assess how much the patient really wants the surgery. Please do not push this surgery onto any patient. The patient should actually demand it from you. So how should you actually go about the surgical decision making? So you need to do the trial balloon test occlusion and the flow scanning. SPECT is possible in most places. If you have a high risk patient, that means he has failed the balloon occlusion, of course, do not go with the surgery, and you need to plan a non-surgical intervention. If the patient has passed the test balloon occlusion, but there is an inadequate scan, a SPECT scan, the reconstruction has to be planned. There is no option. However, if you have a low risk patient who has an adequate cerebral blood flow on SPECT, the reconstruction may be planned, but our recommendation and literature supports reconstruction in all your patients. The advantage of reconstruction is that the morbidity and mortality is significantly lower, and the better types of reconstruction are with autografts, either the great saphenous vein or the superficial femoral artery. Now, many times you would have come across situations in your surgery that you are finding a node that is coming onto the carotid sheath. You are able to get it off, but now you're worried whether you should resect it or not. Now, surprisingly, this is something we can actually see on our imaging. So the patients, initially people said do not resect carotids. They based it on histopathology. So when you looked at histopathology, they found that the ones that had carotid artery resected, almost 60% had intimal infiltration. So that brought about a thought that we should not resect these carotid because it's not a good option. But then when there are certain studies by this colleague, Yu et al., who published in Laryngoscope about the distance of the carotid artery, carotid sheath involvement and intima. So when you have a tumor which is less than 180 degrees, in 50% of these tumors, you would have the tumor more than a 1.8 millimeters away from the elastic lamina. So this gives you a possibility of resecting close to this lamina in order to protect the carotid. And if you have a consideration that you have not planned your surgery and you have a possibility of dissecting, peeling it off, as we would say, You have literature to support this when almost 20% of your patients are alive without any evidence of recurrent tumor. So if you have resected the tumor, you remember from the meta-analysis about 22% survive at 2 years. In this case, if you're peeled off and you have the possibility of an adjuvant radiation or chemoradiation, you would have similar results. So this is the same paper which shows the pathology with more than 1.8 millimeters having a local recurrence of 55% and less than 1.5 millimeter, 1.8 millimeters is 21%. So that means if you have the tumor which is far further away and you have the tumor which is less than 180 degrees, you have got lesser chances of local failure. Now, this is the paper that all of us should read. This is a 2018 publication. And this is a meta-analysis of a recent meta-analysis of the internal carotid artery resection. Now, when you look at this publication, they analyzed from 1981 till 2016. 357 patients. They had a perioperative 30-day mortality of 3.6%. They had a permanent cerebrovascular complication rate of 3.6%. And the carotid blowout episodes was 1.4%. So you can see that the morbidity which was seen earlier has significantly reduced. Now they also went on to analyze the two groups of patients, 1981 to 1999, and then 2000 to 2016. Why this breakup? Because a lot of technologies have changed. Our indications for surgery have changed. Our methods of evaluation of cerebrovascular patterns have changed. Our ability to give adjuvant radiation and chemoradiation are more defined. The pathologists are able to do a better evaluation. So when you look at these 2 year groups, you can see that at the end of 1 year, the group from 1981 to 1999 had a 37% survival. Whereas from 2001 to 2016, it became 65%. That's almost double. So you can see that there is a significant survival difference when your ability to resect has improved, ability to give adjuvant therapies have improved. So what they concluded that sacrifice of the carotid with reconstruction in selected patients may improve survival with acceptable complication rates. However, we need to realize that all this is a very low level evidence, though it is a meta-analysis, because it is retrospective. They are highly selected cases and they are in institutions. So when you read all these meta-analyses, you need to understand that it is not really applicable to all our settings. These are in very select cases and in highly selected group of patients. This is not a randomized evidence. So though it is a meta-analysis, it is a very low level evidence. So I would like to conclude by saying that surgery is fraught with morbidity whenever you're considering carotid artery resection. But there may be a highly select population, maybe a different histology, maybe in a per primum case, maybe when there is no longitudinal spread of the disease along the carotid. You should do these with a multidisciplinary team, not only to make that decision so that there is a collective responsibility, but also when there is a good facility available at your resource. All the considerations, the cerebrovascular events, even the neurological deficits, which may be minor, should be considered along with the patient. So in per primum cases, if you find that there is more than 180 degrees involvement, you should consider a non-surgical treatment because you know that they yield similar results. In recurrent cases, outcomes depend on the ability to resect, adjuvant therapy, and the experience of the team. So I will stop here, and maybe we should take up a few cases and discuss it. And I will hand it over to Vijay for further discussion.
Thanks, thanks for the wonderful description and detailed outcomes of carotid dissections. The most common question among the participants is, how do we manage an accidental carotid injury during neck dissections? How do we manage
So
internal carotid artery?
Right. So when we are talking about an accidental injury, I would like to ask whether it is during removal of this node from the carotid. Because if that's the case, you know that you will have a devitalized tissue where the tumor has infiltrated. So at that point, the most important thing is to maintain the cerebral blood flow. So you need to maintain the blood pressure, you need to give a head low, maintain the fluids. If you have a microvascular team with you, or you yourself are trained in microvascular surgery, you should consider suturing that. If it is shredded, that means the tumor was infiltrating the carotid, which was not seen on your imaging. You should consider maintaining the blood flow using a shunt, and then doing either a vein graft or a arterial graft to reconstruct the carotid. In all probabilities, the most important thing is to have a maintenance of the blood flow to the internal carotid artery.
So if it is during a novice surgeon doing a level 2 neck dissection at level 2B, so yes, he heats the carotid, how do we manage that one?
So the most important thing is that we always worry when there's bleeding at level 2. There is a confluence of lot of structures: the hypoglossal nerve, the veins along the hypoglossal nerve, the internal jugular vein, the occipital artery, the posterior auricular artery, and then the internal carotid artery. So remember that whenever you have a bleed in that area, the most important thing is to isolate all these important structures before you can tackle it. We in a hurry go and clamp a lot of these structures and cause morbidity. So isolate, give a head low, don't worry that it is the internal carotid artery. First think about the vein, the internal jugular vein, as well as the occipital artery and branches of the external carotid. Secure all these and then go on to the internal carotid artery. You need to have space in order to manipulate that surgery. In order to go ahead in that area, you need to create space. So move the posterior belly of digastric away, identify the hypoglossal, identify the occipital, dissect it away from the carotid, and then come on to the carotid. You need to have your bulldog clamps, your vascular clamps with you, and then identify where is the problem area, and then consider doing a suturing. Normally what we do, we suture with a 5-0 Prolene round body needle, and this is done with the magnification if possible.
So what are the cerebral protective measures we'll take during if there is an injury to it? We are clamping it.
Most important, don't clamp it. First give pressure, inform the anesthetist, give a head low, give fluids, see to it that the patient, you call for blood, see if there is a vascular surgeon around. You get help. The most important thing is to get help, because if you're alone, you will not be able to manage it. So you need to have your team call in for help. If there's another surgeon around, please call him, because you need two heads working on that problem. So I first inform the anesthetist, then get another experienced surgeon if possible, and then isolate, as I said, and plan your steps further. If you cannot resect, you cannot suture it, then just ligate it.
So another this thing is common. This thing is when you are doing a difficult neck where there are nodes studded, and you want to know how to go about whether carotid is involved or not involved, which planes to start off with during, what are the technical tips during surgery we have to take care.
The most important thing is you would not find this intra-op. This has to be a clinical judgment that you're anticipating that the carotid may be involved. In those cases, you need to see that you have an MRI with you in order to study the course of the carotid, identify where is the problem. If it's a level 2, you need to understand that you might encounter these difficult resections. Now, when you're going back, can I go back to my presentation 1 minute? So you can see this now?
Yes, sir.
Vijay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So this, you can see that you have the internal jugular vein lateral, you have the internal carotid artery medial. Now, I always find a problem when I have a large node which is sitting on the carotid, on the internal jugular vein. So there are two landmarks that I like. Whenever you've got a problem with the internal jugular vein, you need to go from lateral to medial. So remember, you have the C2 vertebra, and you need to identify that transverse process, and then the structure medial to that will be your internal jugular vein. So when you have a large level 2 node which is stuck, you need to go from lateral to medial. So identify your sternocleidomastoid. In most of these cases, you will be doing a type 2 MND. So you're going to divide the sternomastoid from the mastoid tip, identify your occipital artery, your spinal accessory vein, then come on to the C2 vertebra. Once you identify this bony prominence, you will then be able to identify your internal jugular vein at the higher end. Now, if you have a tumor which is coming on to from medially to the carotid, now you need to separate out the tumor from the external carotid and then come on to the internal carotid. So remember, your internal carotid artery is medial most, so it is protected. So you come, whenever you encounter the issue of carotid dissection, start from medial to lateral. So come identify your tendon of digastric, you identify your hyoid, you identify the branches of the external carotid, and then come on to the carotid. So you are going from medial to lateral. So these are two methods that I would use to identify where my landmarks are before I separate the tumor from the internal carotid.
So another question is, during level 2A dissections in an older patients, there is a carotid knuckle, which seems like a lymph node. How do we differentiate one? What precautions do we take for it?
So we always should be worried about carotid artery knuckling or calcification of the internal carotid artery beyond the bifurcation in elderly individuals or in heavy smokers, because they'll have atherosclerosis as well. So as I mentioned I will always go from medial to lateral dissection. If I am going to take the internal jugular vein, I know that the structures beneath that are the spinal accessory as well as the hypoglossal. So keep these nerves as your landmark. Whenever you're going to resect these, you need to go from medial to lateral, identify your hypoglossal nerve. Once your hypoglossal nerve is identified, it takes care of your carotids, and then you will be able to dissect it off completely. So as you're dissecting from the superior thyroid, you come on to the carotid bulb area and then proceed laterally.
So the one more question is there any study using a PET CT scan for carotid involvement? Is it useful, PET CT scan in carotid involvement?
So carotid involvement per se is not with the PET CT, it is with the contrast enhanced CT scan. So our PET scan department, and I'm sure Ashok in your center as well, they have evolved to do a PET CT with a contrast enhanced CT scan. So if you have a clinical doubt that this carotid is involved, the PET scan is a useful entity to identify distant metastasis. However, if you find that if it's grossly involved more than 270 degrees on the CT scan, and there is loss of fat plane, you don't need further imaging. But if you find that there is no fat plane, there is some fat plane there, and you don't have more than 270 degrees encasement, please get an MRI. So in those situations, I would get a PET scan done first in order to rule out a distant disease, and then also get an MRI if I have any doubt about the carotid involvement. So we are not talking of resecting carotid. We are trying to preempt carotid involvement.
So are there any precautions while dissecting on carotids in post radiotherapy setting, as in a salvage neck dissection setting? What precautions we take around carotids?
So this is very important question, because most of our patients today would have received some form of radiation. So 50 to 70% of your patients in redo surgeries will have been radiated. So you need to have 2 or 3 things ready. One is a proper evaluation of that carotid. Like we said, we will do a CT scan in all our cases, usually a PET CT scan. But if you have any worry, you should do an MRI. Second, intraoperatively, you will have planned for some sort of reconstruction. You need to cover your carotid. So in the various papers that talked about peeling off, what was sacrosanctus, all of these carotids which were peeled off or micro dissected, you would have to cover with a vascularized flap. Remember, when you are dealing with a per primum case, you have the intima intact. When you are dealing with a redo case, you would have the possibility of atherosclerosis. Remember, carotid artery stenosis is very common due to the atherosclerosis that develops following radiation. And 5 years after radiation, we find that the amount of patients coming to us with carotid artery stenosis increased by almost 50%. So whenever you're doing a redo surgery in a post-radiated patient, you need to understand that you will have this issue. So be very careful. Do not do a very extensive dissection. If you find that it is stuck and it is a post-RT case, I would back off.
So another question is, what are the risk of thrombosis if we are suturing an accidental carotid artery injury? We are suturing it. What is the risk of thrombosis?
This is a high pressure system. So your chances of thrombosis and all are very little. It's very unlikely that you would go to both the walls of the carotid and cause inadvertent stenosis. So of course, once you do a carotid artery repair, you have to follow a certain set of guidelines. You need to maintain the patient on heparin. You need to do a duplex carotid scan, that is an ultrasound, to check for the blood flow after 2 weeks. And this patient is advised to be monitored for any carotid artery stenosis later on.
So what is the maximum length of carotid artery involvement which we can be resected?
Maximum the length is not the issue, Vijay. What is the issue is, can you actually suture at both the ends? So you are going to reconstruct that carotid. So whenever you're dealing with a situation where the tumor is close to your level 2, that's the problem area, because you're now going very close to your carotid canal, and you will not be able to get the splay of tissue for suturing. So when you go by the same, interpolate that information that we have from our carotid body tumors, if you don't have a 3 centimeter distance from the skull base, you would not resect the carotid, because you would not be able to reconstruct. So if you're going ahead with a permanent occlusion and resection of the carotid without reconstruction, it's not an issue. So the most important contraindication for a reconstruction is the distance from the skull base.
So how do we get a proximal control? If there is at level 2A area, we have injured an internal carotid artery. So we have to get a proximal control. Distal control is quite easier to get a proximal control because of the presence of mandible. So how do we get control? Is there any other surgical tips for it?
So the carotid artery, internal carotid artery, is below the styloid process. So in order to get access, you need to expose the styloid. So for that, if it means that your tumor is stuck to the posterior belly of digastric and now you've got a carotid injury, while separating it, you need to first see that your stylomandibular ligament is divided. That will give you an additional movement of the mandible off. Then expose or dissect off the posterior belly of digastric, and you will come across the stylohyoid. Once you cut the stylohyoid, you will expose the hyoid, and usually the hyoid bone is very thin and can be easily fractured above. That will give you enough manipulation in order to expose the internal carotid artery as it goes towards the carotid canal. So these are a few of the manipulations that you will do. So dissect off the parotid, identify your posterior belly of digastric, cut the posterior belly of digastric and the stylomandibular ligament, fracture the styloid process above laterally so that you can expose the carotid.
So, if a case of a oral cavity malignancy, which is having a extensive nodal involvement, and it is where the carotid involvement is a radiologically borderline, is there a role of neoadjuvant chemotherapy in those patients?
Now, neoadjuvant chemotherapy is something all of us practice, and you should have clear-cut understanding of what you're going to do following neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So your plan should be very clear. Is it more than 270 degrees encased, wherein you are not going to consider surgery even after a good response? Or there is borderline resectability, and because of other reasons, you're giving neoadjuvant chemo. The primary is also borderline resectable. In those cases, you plan that if there is a good response, I will consider a carotid artery, the dissection of the tumor from the carotid. So in those cases, you will then follow up this with a good imaging after the chemotherapy has been given 2 cycles, and you are then now going to consider resection.
Regarding if there is a large thyroid tumors which are completely where we are not able to see the carotids from the what you call frontal view, what are the surgical tips to identify carotid and separate it from the large thyroid or the thyroid masses?
So you can remember that the thyroid tumors, and most of these are papillary CA thyroids. I'm not talking of anaplastic or medullary. If you're talking about papillary carcinoma thyroid, these rarely infiltrate tissue. They are expansile. So remember, these all tumors are growing from medial to lateral, so they are displaced the vessels laterally and posteriorly. So you will identify the carotid from above and from below and keep peeling off. Do not try to remove that mass along completely. So you will need to do a sequential resection. Remove the lymph nodes around, dissect off the major component of the mass from the major vessels, and then dissect that remnant tissue from the carotid. Remember, we have dissected and peeled off these tumors from large veins. So we have even preserved large internal jugular veins, which seem to have been completely infiltrated by the papillary CA thyroids. In less than 5% of patients, you would find a tumor thrombus within these veins. But I have yet to resect a carotid in a papillary CA thyroid which looked encased by the papillary CA thyroid. So remember that you need to get a control on the vessel, proximal and distal, remove major part of the tumor, and then do a micro dissection.
So what are the local flaps which we use to cover if at all we have resected IJB and the carotid is exposed after neck dissection and we have done a subadventitial dissection sorts? So how do we protect our carotid vessels? What are the local flaps?
This is the most common situation. You would have a patient who requires MND type 3, wherein MND type 1, wherein you're going to resect the IJV, you have to resect the spinal accessory nerve, and now you've got the whole carotid bare. So remember, in these situations, you need to plan to resect the sternocleidomastoid, but not completely. A common method is to remove from the mastoid tip, remove from the clavicle and sternum, and remove it completely. Remember, you rarely have level 3 and 4 nodes, which are large and infiltrating sternomastoid. Most of these are level 2 and level 3 nodes. So you should go with a proper thought. If you're not going to use a pedicle flap for reconstruction, you're not going to use a vascularized flap for reconstruction, you don't have anything to cover the carotid, you need to preserve lower third of your sternocleidomastoid. So I go by a common rule that what is below the level of the omohyoid, I will preserve. So the inferior belly of omohyoid and below, I'll preserve the sternocleidomastoid and then use that to flip suture with the flipped levator scapulae muscle. So that is the most commonly performed reconstruction wherein you can cover your carotid so that it can be protected during the radiation. Now, in a post-radiated situation, when you're not going to consider re-irradiation, it really doesn't matter. But if you have a vascularized cover, it's always better. So in a post-radiated situation, please use a pec major muscle to cover the carotid. And so when you have a vascularized reconstruction, of course, you'll have your tissue which will be covering the carotid.
So in a case of squamous carcinoma with neck mets, if there is an IJV thrombus due to tumor thrombus in IJV, is it worth resecting?
In a squamous cell cancer, if there's a tumor thrombus, is it worth resecting?
In IJV. Yes, so, IJV.
Yeah, so you are looking at a situation wherein you're going to get a lower stump of IJV, and you have just a little bit of a thrombus within it. So if you are evaluated your patient, there is no distant disease, there's no chest metastasis, you would be getting a low control on your internal jugular vein. You can safely resect it.
So if there's a scenario where we have a thyroid malignancies or any squamous carcinomas, where there is a issue of resecting both the internal jugular veins, how do we manage such scenarios?
Both the internal jugular veins at the same sitting is not recommended. So you would be planning to do evaluation of the contralateral side. So whenever you have a situation where you're going to go ahead with an IJV resection, we always plan to do the contralateral neck first. On the contralateral neck, if you are able to preserve the internal jugular vein, you will go ahead and resect. Now, there are situations wherein you will have inadvertently damaged one vein, resected one side vein, and the other side you're damaged it. So in those cases, plastic surgeons have used the cephalic vein, brachiocephalic vein cephalic vein to reconstruct. So they flip it over and reconstruct it with the internal jugular vein. So to restore the blood supply. So if you have a segmental loss, you might reconstruct it with a saphenous graft. If you have a completely low down also you have resected, then you can use this flip.
So can we, this thing is, if you resect on both sides, can we reconstruct both sides with the saphenous? Is it a feasible option?
Saphenous is a feasible option, but we haven't done both sides reconstruction, Vijay. We have done surgery in a patient with a period of 2 weeks intervening, so that it gave us time to plan the plastic reconstruction. This was at a time when our microvascular team was not well developed. But now, if we have a situation wherein we need to reconstruct, resect, we would have the microvascular team coming in and reconstructing the vein.
So regarding the resection of external carotid arteries, so right. How frequent means is it advisable for a squamous carcinoma neck nodes to resect external carotid if it is involved, and if it is if we are resecting, what precautions do we take?
Sorry, I didn't get the question again. If you have
if you have a nodal mets from squamous carcinoma,
right,
where there's a need of to resect the external carotid artery,
right.
So what are the precautions we take while resecting the external carotid artery, and how do we make sure that the common carotid and internal carotid are safely preserved and external carotid artery can be resected?
So
Intraoperatively, how
as
do
a
you
point,
decide?
as a question I am getting is that if you have a tumor which is a node which is stuck to the external carotid artery, how would you preserve the common carotid and the internal carotid artery? So the issue is that in situations where the tumor comes off the larynx, this is very common to encounter. So you have a tumor that comes out of the larynx and then comes straight on the superior thyroid artery. And that's where it becomes very close to the carotid bulb area. So in those cases, we will do a microdissection of the tumor from the superior thyroid in order to get a stump. Do not suture the, do not like resect the superior thyroid artery close to the carotid bulb. So you need to have a stump and always secure it with transfixation. So do not just ligate it, secure it with transfixation. The second situation that you encounter is when you have a tumor in the upper level 2 and you are coming onto the posterior belly of digastric and it is infiltrated. So at that point, as I mentioned before, you get more space by dividing the stylomandibular ligament so that you are retracting the mandible. You will now see the external carotid, which is coursing before it gets into the parotid. So at that point, you would have a proximal and a distal control, and then you'll be able to resect it better. All in all, you're trying to preserve the hypoglossal nerve, you're trying to preserve the spinal accessory, and you're trying to protect the internal carotid artery. So whenever you're dealing with a situation where your external carotid above the level of digastric is involved, use the manipulation of the mandible in order to get more space.
So if we are doing a subadventitial dissection around the carotids, is there a way to identify a sympathetic trunk and avoid its injury? Is there any way to it? Because sympathetic injury and Horner's is a frequent complication of when we dissect at that area.
Right. So we need to understand the anatomy from lateral to medial. So you'll have the internal jugular vein, you'll have the 9, 10, 11 nerves, you'll have the internal carotid artery, and then you'll have the sympathetic chain. So the medial most compartment would be the sympathetic chain, and that would be going along the carotid. So like we discussed, you would need to plan your dissection from medial to lateral so that you're going from the hyoid, you're coming on to the superior thyroid, you're coming on to your branches, the external carotid, and then coming on. So if you have a tumor that is now coming onto the prevertebral fascia, you would then know that the sympathetic and all would be involved. In those cases, it is very difficult to resect this with an R0 clearance and you will leave behind disease. So of course, if you are, you have to remove the disease completely. I don't think Horner's is such a high morbidity. If you are able to remove the disease with that being the only site where you would have left, I would resect it.
If at all, in the cases where there are parapharyngeal masses, large parapharyngeal masses, where though there is no involvement of carotids, but to get it out from to avoid an injury to sympathetic nerves, is there any other surgical technique or tips to identify and preserve it?
I'm not aware of any other technique. Vijay, do you know of anything
No, sir.
else?
It's for the discussion purpose.
Okay.
And Akshay wants to know, is there an operability in a salvage neck dissection? Is the operability based on pre-radiotherapy images or on the remnant disease image? Is radiologically operable criteria is the same in the salvage setting also?
So the question is that if you have a tumor which has recurred, whether you will, and you're given neoadjuvant chemotherapy, whether you will base it on pre-chemo or post-chemo.
Yes, yes, yes.
So this is unlike the primary tumor wherein you're worried about margins. Here you're worried about removing the node from the carotid. So you will evaluate the imaging. Like I said, if your tumor is completely, it was more than 180 degrees, close to 270 degrees, you would want an MRI to know what is the status of involvement of the carotid. What is the fat plane? What is the artery deformed or not? and is it infiltrated? So if you have any such indication that it's infiltrated, you would consider not operating those patients.
So how do we take a lower control of IJV? If at all, means sometimes it is very close to the clavicle. Is there any tips and tricks to take a lower control of IJV?
So lower control of IJV would be from the subclavian. So you would have to dissect out. So again, the issue is of space. So we work in, when we are doing a neck dissection, we are not creating space, and that's why we encounter problems. So you have to divide the sternocleidomastoid low down. You need to identify your carotid, because now your carotid is medial. You identify your carotid, you identify your anterior jugular veins. Now remember, the anterior jugular veins will be draining into the subclavian. You identify those, you come on to the internal jugular vein again from medial to lateral, and from lateral to medial, you will identify your transverse cervical vessels. On the left side, see to it that you're dissecting above the level of the carotid so that you do not damage the thoracic duct. Once you have got all these spaces cleared, automatically you will get space in order to get a control. If you still find that it is involving lower down, then you would need to make a decision whether you will do a mini sternotomy in order to get access to the subclavian. And if it is a squamous cancer and you have such deep infiltration, most of the times we will not be doing this resection.
Thank you, sir.
You want to give any clue about the mini sternotomy?
So last time we had a similar case where it was almost onto the lower end of the IJV and onto the subclavian veins. And it was also extending along the axillary veins. So we went along the axillary vein. We dissected the tumor of the axillary vein, and it was a myxoid liposarcoma. So we dissected it off from the axillary veins. Then we made it hit the periosteum of the clavicle and dissected it off from the periosteum. So we had a space from down to control the subclavian if we injure it, and also at the same time we actually didn't do in that case. We had actually planned to do a claviculectomy so that if at all we miss it, we can be able to take at least you will get extra 2 centimeter length below our regular whatever we get in the neck. We'll get at least 1 or 2 centimeter below it.
Right. So I'm seeing some questions. In case of Ashok Das, in case of per primum surgery of neck with carotid resection and reconstruction, if need adjuvant post-op RT, what is the guideline? So I feel that all these patients will require adjuvant chemoradiation because these are all large nodes with extracapsular spread. That is why you need to resect the carotid. So the precaution that we would do is do a microvascular reconstruction, use vascularized flaps. So over your reconstructed carotid, you would have a vascularized cover, and of course the patient needs to get post-operative chemoradiation.
So Sanket wants to know, when you're planning a carotid resection, how do you approach the tumor intraoperatively? Do you start from proximal to distal or medial to lateral? How is it?
You need to get a control proximal and distal both, because you're going to go ahead with the thought that you're going to do a reconstruction. So whenever we are going to do a reconstruction, you need to have a proximal and distal control. So as I've seen the vascular surgeons do this, they will first put a Javits shunt so that they restore the blood flow from the distal to the proximal. So first of all, you need to give them space in order to put that shunt. So the shunt is basically a large bore needle which is put on both the sides. So where the tumor is along the segment of the carotid that's isolated proximally and distally, you put in a Javits shunt so that the blood flow is restored, and then you use your vascular clamps in order to identify this segment above and below the Javits shunt, and then resect. So what you have is normal tissue above and below where you're going to actually do the anastomosis with your either autologous or your PTFE graft.
So, in case of sentinel bleed of carotid blowout, is there a role of hemostatic RT?
There won't be enough time. So what I would, instead of depending on RT, if I have the facility of intervention radiology, I would then consider doing a stenting. So if you have a patient who is bleeding and it is coming from the carotid, I don't think you will have enough time for hemostatic RT.
So how do you manage a subclavian vein injured inadvertently during surgery? A neck
Subclavian.
dissection?
I'll call Vijay. No, it is very difficult to imagine that you will go ahead and damage the subclavian vein because it's very deep down. I don't think you would have that possibility of dissecting so low down. So like we discussed before, if you have a tumor that's going so low down, you're really worried about the brachial plexus, you're worried about these before you come to the subclavian because this is so deep down. So I would imagine this tumor to be deep seated and infiltrating all these structures. So if you have a subclavian vein injury, remember that the subclavian never collapses. That's one structure that will not collapse because it's got support from all the sides. So you need to, unlike other veins which will collapse, you need to give a cover over it, see to it that there's a positive pressure ventilation because this will now absorb, suck in air. You need to flood that area with saline so that there is no air going in, and you need to give a head load to that patient. And first of all, ask the anesthetist to give a positive pressure ventilation and then call Vijay.
So, thanks, sir. Thanks for the excellent talk and giving us surgical tips and tricks to manage with the basis of applied anatomy and the various ways to approach carotid and the various way to resect it and various ways to reconstruct it, and also how to manage it if we are having a subarventitial dissection, how to protect carotids. Thanks, thanks for the wonderful discussion. It is just like our every Tuesday evening classes where we get a packet of knowledge in 1 hour. It is it's exactly similar. Thank you, sir. Thanks for the excellent the presentation.
I thank you, Vijay, and I thank Akshay and his team for this efforts. I think a lot of people are benefiting from this, and I really thank the team for involving me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's always been a pleasure to interact with you and discuss with you about the surgical steps and techniques.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pai sir. Thank you, Vijay, for moderating the session. I think a few important points as the histology, as sir told, to take the histology into factor, that if it's a thyroid cancer, if it's an adenocystic cancer or something else, we should not just go by radiology and think, okay, it's not operable and just leave the patient there. So we have to take that biology into consideration and make our decision with clinically, radiologically, and pathologically basis. Thanks for putting evidence with clinical and tips and giving us clear idea how to manage the carotid body. Even though the topic looked dry, you made it lively and it went on long with a lot of discussion. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Akshay.
Thank you, sir.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.